The Facebook experience was like a really interesting one because, it went like way better than we ever could have imagined. And going through, I got there when we had about 5 million users, and left when we had around 1 billion. And, going from just a few, 50 people in a room to thousands of people serving 1 billion people, at a very rapid pace, like 3 years, was pretty intense. I think it's pretty easy to get extremely lost in ego. And this is like a pretty hard thing to admit, I guess, but like, we were all in our 20s, didn't know what we were doing in a lot of respects, and suddenly had the world at the doorstep. And, I think it's easy to let your ego get out in front of you, and to be sort of leading with too much ego in a way.
Yeah,
and I mean, if you go back, I think, and look at that era in Facebook, you saw a lot of sort of public and press reaction against that sort of hubris that I think I certainly fell victim to that, certainly. And I think a big reason I came out of Facebook and went into trying to start Path with like a much more intentional kind of mission was because I felt like I had gotten so lost in the ego of serving, this many people, and how lucky are we, and
Right.
all that kind of humble.
Because if you're a central person at Facebook back then, you were the man.
Yeah.
I mean, the media wants you, people want you, VCs
Yeah.
want you, like everybody wants you, and so that has its own challenges.
Yeah, and I think it's like, you see this happen in cycles in Silicon Valley where people get sort of super lost in the ego. They go to all the conferences, they speak at all the things, they go on all the travel and forget about the company, and forget about that. At the end of the day, the reason that you're doing this is because the society is giving you permission to serve this important need, right? And it's not about you, right? I actually remember towards the end, thinking about, there was a book that I read that the first line, I think it was the Purpose-Driven Life, and the first line said, "It's not about you," and I think that like that in the end, it's really easy to think when you're going through one of those experiences that it is, and it's not. It's about service.
We started this new company, Path. Google offered $100 million for it, I think, after a couple months.
Yeah.
It had a lot of hype, and it didn't necessarily live up to that hype.
No.
So you got different lessons. Would you speak briefly to like what some of the lessons were in creating something that like almost had hype from the beginning before it even knew what it wanted to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the hype came out of the ego of the previous experience. And I started Path because I wanted to build a social network that was optimized for happiness. My sense was, and that's like a pretty broad, like grandiose goal in a lot of ways. And the idea behind it was to limit the number of connections that you could have to 150, because that's the optimal number of friendships that the human brain can maintain. Like, science has proven it. And even though we had spent all these years at Facebook trying to get people to be connected to more people, like the average at Facebook when I left was still 147. And so,
of people you actually knew.
Yeah, that was like the average number of friends on Facebook.
Oh, wow.
At the time. And they were rapidly working to increase that number, but like, it had sort of been proven that like this is the case. And so I wanted to build a network, mostly because I'm from Montana. I really love my family. I missed my family. I realized I was like driving back home from the South Bay to the city every night, and I never was using Facebook to communicate with my family. And I thought, wow, that's like, we've worked on all this connectivity and connectedness, but yet this isn't a medium I'm using for my family. And so a big part of the mission of Path was like, can you create a network that's just optimized for family? I sort of used to use the metaphor that it was like the difference between the town square and your dinner table. And I think that like that was what we were trying to do.